Hello, everybody. This is another Streaming with Lee. I like to tell people the dates we're doing this so that you kind of put it into the framework of the virus in general and where we all are in general. And this is the 12th of April. And today we're going to present something to you that is completely different than the last one with a physician. We have a physician again today, but this one is a researcher. And I'm going to tell you all about him in a moment. He's a good personal friend. And his name is Dr. Todd. So even before I give you my little talk on it and tell you some things about it, I want to bring him in just to say hello. Todd, are you there?
I'm here, Lee. How are you today?
Awesome. Talk to me. Say what is going on in your office?
Well, it's Easter Sunday, so I'm the only one here, which is not uncommon on the weekends. And it's a great time to dive into things and get things done. And there's quite a lot to do, adding this whole Corona issue on top of our usual activities. And I'm excited about sharing an overview today.
Awesome. I want to talk to people about you for a moment in a way that perhaps you haven't heard me talk about you. And that is non-scientifically really and non-medically really. It's about the phenomenon that I've known. In fact, one of the things I want you to do when we start is I would love you to share how you met me and how you found out about Cryon. But before we do that, I want to tell you this man has an invention. It's a physics invention. You're going to hear talk about a laser. And when you talk about laser light, coherent light, there are so many healers that say, well, I've got a laser for this or a laser for that. And you can wear, headgear with a laser on it to make your hair come back. It's just, you hear a lot of laser talk. It's just nothing whatsoever to do with what Dr. Todd has discovered. This physics invention of many, many years ago was a co-invention with a man named Scott Stratkin of Scotland. This is the guy who co-invented the sonogram. He's no slouch. And between Todd and Scott, they come up with what I think is one of the most unique physics inventions someday you're going to see, maybe even of the century when this gets out and known a lot more. What happens when you take coherent light, which is laser light, and you take it and throw it out of phase with itself? Now, if you're not technical, this means nothing to you, but I'll just tell you that when you put things out of phase and put them together, they cancel each other. And you have this with light, coherent light, you have it with sound, and this is what they did. No one has ever been able to do this. This is an absolutely unique physics invention. The bottom line is that created something that's never been seen before on the planet. It created a field. And this field is what Dr. Todd uses in his laser light work. So when you hear him talk about the laser, it's the field that is created by this laser. And that field is something that nobody's seen anything like this. And that is what happens when you use that field around some chemistry, around biology, around stem cells, around the body. It's such a complementary, I would say, handshake to health. All of the experiments, all of these years, and the things that he has done, which I'm going to tell you in just a moment, have shown amazing success that nobody ever thought of. I remember the first time I saw that field applied to AIDS. And within, I would say, just an hour of taking the blood out of a human being and putting it back and putting in this field that was created by this laser, we had a viral load that went to almost undetectable when it was a full level before. I'm not getting technical here. I'm going to give you all of the numbers. But that is the kind of thing we're looking at. So we had really beneficial results for 20 years on almost everything that it's been that's touched. This led originally to a supplement company. And I think Dr. Todd is the most well known for the company that he represents, which is called Gematria. These supplements, I have been on these supplements for years and years. Now, they work for me. I'm really 104. That's a joke. Oh, by the way, for those of you tuning in, I am indeed, it looks like I'm wearing the same shirt that I wore the last time on the last videos. Actually not, but I shop at Macy's. And what happens with Macy's is that they continue having the same stock for men. They're very, very smart. And so this isn't the same shirt, it's just the same shirt. It's just another shirt that's the same. You understand that? I went back to Macy's, bought the same shirt, so it's really not, okay, never mind. What I want to tell you is that Dr. Todd, I've invited him to the show because he's a DNA researcher. More than DNA, he's a researcher of the human body, and for years he has come up with some very unique ideas, especially right now, it's stem cell technology. He has ways of making these stem cells behave in the body that no one has been able to do. So he's on the cusp of research, and I want to hear what he has to say about where we are, the coronavirus, but even more than that, the future. Like say, where is this going from here? Doctor, Todd, would you please tell people how you found out about me? And then you can go on, because this is not about me, it's just about synchronicity.
Right. The earliest work that we were doing with the laser, in fact, the original reason for inventing the technology was an insight when I was a pulmonary fellow working in the intensive care units at Georgetown University Hospital. And at that time, I was seeing AIDS patients with pneumonia, doing bronchoscopies at weird hours of the day. And I really thought there must be a better way to approach this phenomenon, and got the insight that there would be some way that the viral nucleic acid arranged itself geometrically that would be different from human. If there was a different geometry, there would be a different so-called fundamental frequency. And if we could determine that frequency, we in theory could inactivate the virus literally just through resonance, through hitting a vibration that would over-energize part of the virus and not allow it to replicate. So that was an idea. And my moving to California after finishing my training at Georgetown was largely based on following that line of inspiration. And there's a long version of the story, and the short version, which is
give us the short version.
This context is I was taking that line of thought into the lab with this new laser discovery, this new type of aligning the waves of the laser to create the so-called phase conjugate wave, where you line the layers up out of phase and create phase cancellation, as a much more effective way to deliver these biologically influential resonances. And we achieved the ability to completely inactivate HIV in the test tube using no drugs or chemistry whatsoever. And the carrier wave, which was a vibration tuned to the viral protein spikes, people thinking a lot about that now with all the corona issues, as people are understanding how viruses are shaped in their internal anatomy, that alone was able to inhibit the virus by 80%, but it required something more to get complete inactivation, which was creating a series of frequencies that created a sculpted magnetic field that interfered with the repeating parts of the virus. So what was really amazing was that the friend of mine who was going to the lab with me, and this work was done at University of Southern California with one of the co-authors of the original HIV discovery paper, a Syed Zaki Salahuddin, and he kindly let us do this work in his lab. And that Christmas, my friend who was my lab colleague gave me the first cryon book as a Christmas gift.
This was the white one, the original one written, I think it was in 93.
Something like that. Yeah, well, that was 1995. Christmas of 95, I think, something like that. And on page 121, I remember very clearly, at least in that particular edition of Cryon Book 1, that it was stated that to inactivate a virus, you cannot use a uniform magnetic field because you change all the parts of the virus with respect to itself in the same way. You need a sculpted magnetic field that interferes with the replicating or repeating parts of the virus. And that's exactly what we were doing in the laboratory. And when we added that piece, we got complete inactivation below the so-called COV, or cutoff value of detection. And when I read that, I was very excited, and I sent you a note, and it turned out that both your and my addresses at that time were in Del Mar. So I said, not only is that interesting idea from crime, but we've done it in the laboratory and it works. And by the way, we're in each other's backyard. So that's where
I could have probably walked to your home at that point in time.
Right.
That is the definition of synchronicity. And that really put us together. And by the way, I remember going to his home, and it was more than 20 years ago, I think, and he showed me the laser. And at that particular point in time, it was enormous. And he had to have special circuit so it wouldn't overload and things like that. Now it's been completely and totally miniaturized, and there's many of them that you can use in the laboratories for research and also in the stem cell labs. All right, now we get to the meat of this, and thank you for that, because I want people to understand the relationship, and especially the one with Cryon. And we are still in the same city. We're basically San Diego County, and I'm now living in Carlsbad, and he's in Oceanside, and that's also very close to one another. And the other thing that is that the Gematria Laboratories and business is located in Carlsbad, where I live. So I could almost walk to Gematria from where I am now. So we're still very, very close in that. All right. I want to turn you loose on this because I want you, first of all, let's title this talk, and I want you to just go. And forgive me, I'll just probably interrupt when I want to comment or when I want more clarifications, but tell me what's going on.
Sure. So the title for this presentation, and I give it some thought, is Beyond Corona, Enhancing Human Biology. And I really would like to give a review of the corona scenario because it's still hot and in our faces, as it were, and affecting our day-to-day lives. And it will have a particular lifespan of influence or things we can do to mitigate and minimize that, and I really would like to share. And I also want to create a context that beyond Corona, and in part because of Corona, we're entering an opportunity to really take our understanding of biology and how to positively influence our biology, our health, our wellness, our lifespan, even our physical capabilities. We now have the technology and understanding to take that to another level. So part one is understanding the current state of the corona pandemic and what to do to keep oneself and others safe and to bring it more rapidly to a state of abeyance. And then beyond that, what's the positive message? Where can we go from here? What is our potential to go beyond our current state of biology?
I think that the potential part is probably the one that interests me the most because we've had so many explanations and all, but not like you're going to give. So we're going to get there, I know. So you've intrigued me already. So tell me your take on the virus right now and what's going on.
Mm-hmm. It's been amazing to me that there's never been a time since I've been alive that the whole world was really unified in attention and focus on a problem or a challenge. And refreshingly, it's not a challenge of one country versus another or one ideology versus another or even one company against another. It's like all of humanity versus a microbe. And it has galvanized the kinds of cooperation that you sort of always hoped you would see as a scientist, but we're really actually getting to it. So that alone, I think, is very positive and refreshing. Now, I'll make a few general points that have been really hashed over quite a bit, which is the social distancing thing and the hand washing. Be careful of touching elevator buttons that probably everybody's touched and that sort of thing. There have been some really great reporters that early on were gathering information from multiple sources and putting it together. And I would say that the social distancing understanding, as it was demonstrated in the dynamics of what happened in China and then South Korea and Italy, it really made the point that the sooner a country realized what was going on and proceeded to not exactly lockdown, but at least keeping people at home as much as possible and doing social distancing, with the mathematical analyses that I've seen, even starting that social distancing one day earlier could prevent as much as 40% of the spread of the disease. So the science behind it, the rationale, the mathematical modeling is really quite profound, and that the US, New York, and California in particular accelerated that somewhat, I think has made a difference. And the rationale for it is good, and despite the nuisance of it, it is important that we are relatively staying at home, keeping our distance. Now, hand washing, of course, is very important. The one thing I personally don't really get is this whole thing about like coughing and blowing your nose into your elbow. I don't know that A, we have the habit for it, or B, that it's that much better coughing into your shirt. You still need to clean your shirt. It seems to be
and thank you for saying that. I always wondered about that. Coughing into your elbow, then infects your elbow.
Right.
So really, I think is what we should tell everybody is don't touch anybody's elbow.
All right. Would you rather have phlegm on your sleeve or like,
I'm sorry, I don't mean to be making fun of any of these things. It's very, very profound, very real, very serious, but you're right.
Well, I think it's just practical. I've really thought about that. It's like none of us have the reflex of coughing into our elbow. It makes much more sense to have Kleenex and use that if you're actually in a health condition where you need it. Actually, if you actually need it, you should be staying at home. That's unless someone else get the groceries. And others have commented on this as well. It makes just as much sense to cough in your hands as usual, and then wash your hands, because we know that works. And then you don't have stuff that is potentially infectious hanging out on your elbow that you might contact all day. So one comment I'd like to make on that. And then beyond that, the masks do make a difference. There's a rationale and a logic for that. And one of my office staff actually handmade a mask for me that has the cave art from the Aborigines in Australia with the Seven Sisters on it. So at least I got a cool mask.
There's a lot of very, very unique and fun designs that we're starting to see with masks. So it's good to see that people have a lot of time at home that they can do these kinds of things.
Right, exactly. So the basic stuff that is constantly hammered in really does make sense. Stay at home, social distancing, wash your hands, wear a mask. I think there's also been a question about gloves. Basically, if you're out and your gloves are touching everything, it's not that much different from your hands touching everything. It's more important really to be mindful of washing your hands than necessarily wearing gloves. So those are the core things, the basic.
And there's one thing too that we learned from Dr. John Ryan in the last interview with him that most people don't understand, and I may get this right or not, is that the virus doesn't sit there and grow by itself. It needs to reproduce in a human being. Mm-hmm. So it's not out there growing and infecting things all by itself. It needs us to carry it, right?
Right. And if it's going to have an actual contact with the potentially vulnerable surface, we have to get it there. I mean, either it's going to be a respiratory droplet in the air that we breathe in, that's what the masks are good for helping, or if it gets on our fingers and we touch the side of our face, it's not going to like crawl anywhere. We have to like push it there somewhere. So it doesn't make sense to.
Can we back up a little bit? Because one of the things you said as far as the absolutely unique in your lifetime, in my lifetime, is that we've never had anything that united the world to this degree unless it was World War.
Right.
And then we're all involved. And we're not. It's kind of like the war with a microbe. And one of the strangest, ironic things, and I wrote it in my bulletin, and not everybody sees that, is that they have actually done a ceasefire in a war in Yemen. Mm-hmm. And there's, if you want to know which war that is, it's all over the news. They did a ceasefire, and I just backed up for a moment and said, wait a minute. They are so afraid of the flu that it interrupted the process of killing each other. And I went, there's something here we should take a look at. Ceasefire. Because you're afraid of the flu, so don't kill each other for a while. When everybody's healed, we'll get back to it. And it makes you wonder about that phrase, if they gave a war, nobody came. Would there still be
right.
war? Yeah.
Right, yeah. I mean, if the end product of this is more compassion and putting a halt on wars, maybe we can make a habit of all that.
I'll say. So continue.
Mm-hmm. Another point as I've been doing the research, and what I will share is that I've been gathering information from all around the world and all different types of practitioners. And there'll be sort of two other levels of the discussion. It will be one, what can people do to enhance their general immunologic function to make themselves more personally resistant? And then I'm also going to create a list of those treatments that already have significant proof that they're effective, or at least those that are probably going to be effective because they've been shown to work for previous iterations of corona, like the MERS, the Middle Eastern Respiratory Syndrome. So for those that haven't had the opportunity to scour the literature and have a variety of practitioners providing input, I'm going to create a type of comprehensive listing so people know those things that actually have been effective. And even if their doctors have been too busy to find out, there'll be one place people can go to say, well, this is the list of things that either have worked or are likely to work. And if that's more generally known, those strategies might be more widely used, and that will also potentially make a big difference.
So do I understand that you're going to give us that list?
Correct. Yeah, I'm hoping to finish that in the next few days, then I will make it widely available.
Okay. And if you wish to, because this is pre-recorded and we're going to present it online for free for everybody, if you want to give me that list too, I can put it on the screen. And we'll do it, and people are hearing the inside of this, but so that they don't have to go anywhere, they can go there too. But I'll put it on the screen with a link.
Nice. So there's a few weird pieces of information before I get into the immune strengtheners, and I just sort of reviewed sneezing and coughing. So which would you guess creates a higher escape velocity, a sneeze or a cough?
I would guess a sneeze.
Want to guess the velocity of a good sneeze?
You got me.
It's actually up to 100 miles per hour.
Oh, whoa. Wow.
And can expel up to 100,000 respiratory droplets, those little teeny droplets that suspend in the air that people can breathe in, which is the dominant mechanism of respiratory viruses being transmitted. So with all the attention on hand washing, which is appropriate, the biggest issue is really being in a room where people are coughing, and that's probably the best reason why staying at home and social distancing does make a difference. Also, the 6-foot rule is interesting. Now, a cough will only get to about 50 miles per hour, still pretty fast, and up to 3,000 droplets, not as many, but enough to be suspended in the air, and they'll suspend up for 10 minutes. What's also relevant is the distance. So for a cough, that distance of spread isn't just 6 feet, it's actually up to about 18 feet, and for a sneeze, it's up to 24 feet. So the recommendation of 6 feet, it sounds good. It's probably okay. People are just doing quiet breathing, because people could potentially exhale some mini droplets that way that are potentially infectious.
Can I just interrupt you to say, because I've been on stage for most of my life here in the last 30 years, there is something else too, and that is just normal talking.
Right.
When somebody puts a spotlight on somebody on stage and you just look at it a certain way, it is so interesting just to watch the spray that comes out of their mouth just from talking.
Right.
That's, I
Right.
think,
Right.
where the 6 feet also comes from. You're talking to a person, just normal talking. It's so interesting. You wouldn't think that, but that large spotlight that comes on stage, you can see it, and many have who will go to plays and things of this nature, and it's just a mist that comes out of your mouth just when you're doing expletives and things of this nature. So,
Right. Right. So for regular talking, as you're saying, that the 6 foot rule does make a lot of sense. And it's logical that if someone's actively coughing or sneezing that looks like they're a corona candidate, 6 feet probably isn't enough. You should really steer clear. And even if someone's been in the room and you've seen that, you should give it 10 minutes for that to settle down, because that's how long the particles can stay suspended. So a little, as much as I would like to put people at ease, and that's the purpose of the information, just to have some empowerment of feeling more control of things that can be done, there can be more caution about if you see someone who actively looks sick, that is sneezing and coughing, 24 feet is probably a
just leave, basically.
Yeah.
Just, yeah, right.
Just go away.
Just go away.
Go elsewhere.
So we're pretty tired of being sequestered, and it's only been a couple of weeks, I think.
Right.
Coming home from Iceland, they took my temperature, and they looked at me and gave me a sheet of paper, and they say, "Please go home and don't go out for at least 2 weeks." So,
Right.
and that's when I landed actually in Boston, and told them, they saw I was on my way to California, get home as soon as you can and stay there. So, yeah, those were the instructions.
Yeah. Yeah. And it makes sense. Even though Iceland is not where you were as a particular hotspot in the
No,
world.
it's not a hot spot at all. It's a cold spot. Just to let you know. No, it's absolutely true. There was very, very little activity, and the activity of the virus was almost all sequestered to tourists. Yeah.
Right, right. And in terms of a projection, what I've seen, at least for the US, is that the peak is expected around April 15th, which is only 3 days from now. And I think it's kind of metaphoric and synchronistic that it's coming on the usual income tax deadline day.
Yes, it is. There would be those who would draw that together and go, this is all a government conspiracy. Except that they've also given us a pass on the tax break in that
Yeah.
we're not going to charge you if you're late. Yeah.
Thank goodness for those breaks, as it were. And that said, just because we're getting to the peak and it's going to get gradually better and better, we still need to ride out the wave on the back end. Now, from the standpoint of immune defense, I believe it was for the swine flu, the government of Mexico invited me to make recommendations to mitigate the potential adverse impact of that. There was a point that there was a concern that many millions of people could have succumbed to that. And over a week, I put together a series of recommendations based upon what was shown to be effective for reducing the risk of symptomatic influenza. And what's very interesting, and some people are talking about it, with some of the reviews I've heard it mentioned, that the single most validated intervention that I've seen so far in terms of actually having clinical data to support it is using a nutrient called N-acetylcysteine, or NAC. And the specific amount that was used in the studies was 600 milligrams twice a day, and that product is readily available in health food stores. I've looked for it and gotten it. And what was interesting with influenza A, and even though corona is more virulent than influenza A, the mechanisms are similar, the transmission route is similar, the cellular protective mechanisms are similar. So I would anticipate there to be comparable benefit. And that is that what NAC does, it provides the key amino acid that the body uses to make a very important intracellular antioxidant called glutathione. And glutathione has been called the key anti-tumor, anti-aging antioxidant in the cells. And pretty much everything that boosts intracellular glutathione levels is going to have a protective effect with viruses. I saw this also with my studies on HIV, whether it was NAC or providing glutathione directly or other things that enhance glutathione action, such as the microelement called selenium. Everything that boosted glutathione levels or the function of it. And what selenium does, it works with the enzyme glutathione peroxidase. It's a necessary cofactor that allows glutathione to have its antioxidant action.
So before you go further, go back to the name of the chemical you said was available that you know?
Yeah, it is N-acetyl-cysteine, abbreviated NAC.
NAC. Does it have any brand names that you know of, or sometimes it's hard to get that without knowing what the brand name is?
Yeah, I think Jarrow is a pretty good brand for it. I think that's probably the one that I've gotten. We do have a gematria former that was one of the ones that we used for mitigating the HIV epidemic in Africa, called air caps, air for accelerated immune recovery, and taking 2 capsules twice a day would provide the recommended amount of the NAC, plus also zinc and selenium.
Okay, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but there's people listening to this and go and say, would you give that name again? And I can just hear that coming, so thank you.
So it's NAC, N-acetylcysteine, and for general purposes, Twin Labs should have it, Jarrow should have it, and people can be in touch with Gematria as well for what solutions we might have. But general market, it should be pretty readily available. So that's number one. If one just did only that one thing, according to the studies, the likelihood of symptomatic influenza is reduced by 80%. And what was interesting in the studies, it didn't necessarily prevent people from getting influenza A, but if they did, it greatly mitigated the symptoms. So people were 80% less likely even to be symptomatic just taking that one nutrient.
That's very valuable.
Yeah.
Thank you. I had not heard that before, and that's why we're talking to you.
The other things that are useful, selenium is very interesting. As I said, it's vital for the effectiveness of glutathione, which is probably why the NAC is useful. And what was very interesting is that studies in Africa of the likelihood of HIV in a particular country, those nations where the selenium content was low in the soil had prevalences that were as high as 30 or 35% in the adult population. Whereas if selenium was high in the soil, which then means it gets into the food and people have more in the diet, the rates went as low as like 0.5 to 1%. So that one simple micronutrient was significantly associated with a great reduction of the prevalence and the virulence of HIV, for example. And I believe that is, again, through the glutathione mechanism. Another factor that is very important is zinc. And there is a doctor in New York who's gotten a good bit of press, and I think deservedly so. And before I get there, let me just give like a recommendation for selenium. The RDA is 70 micrograms per day. So somewhere in the area of 140 to 200 micrograms per day would be a very good intake of selenium to get the protective benefit of that.
And that is also available in pharmacies and drugstores, selenium?
Yes, generally available.
Yeah.
Probably the best form is the selenium that is combined or complexed with the amino acid methionine. So you'll see it as selenomethionine as the delivery system that's going to work best with sulfur groups, and the sulfur is what makes the N-acetylcysteine and glutathione work.
And then let me just interrupt now for those who are just saying all of this stuff. This is not the things that are going to kill the virus. This is to boost your immune system to a level that is reasonable, so you either won't catch it, or if you do, it mitigates a lot of the symptoms. Is that correct?
Right. It's about strengthening the immune system so that one is generally more resistant, and even if one were to contract it, the likelihood of serious symptoms would be reduced. Things you can do proactively to strengthen yourself. And by strengthening yourself, also serving as a way to shorten the course of this epidemic. Now, the zinc factor is interesting, and there's been some very good press. I'll get to this more when we talk about the things that have been proven. Zinc has also been shown to support various internal antiviral mechanisms. And the RDA of that is 15 milligrams per day. The most bioavailable form is in the delivery system of so-called amino acid chelates, where 2 amino acids wrap around the zinc as a delivery system that may make it 2 or 3 times more bioavailable. But even basic forms like zinc sulfate or zinc citrate are reasonably beneficial.
Can I have that chemical again, because there was a little cutout in the internet?
Sure. So zinc, basically, I would recommend between 15 and 50 milligrams per day of the elemental zinc. The best delivery form is going to be amino acid chelates. And the opto manufacturer of that is a company called Albion. They really do their homework and assure that one gets true coordinated amino acid complexes that are a special type of delivery system that improves the absorption and the intracellular delivery. So that's the best, but even short of that, just more mundane zinc forms that aren't as bioavailable, like zinc sulfate and zinc citrate, are still going to be beneficial. The proposed mechanism for hydroxychloroquine, which has been presented as one of the effective treatments, it appears to work by improving the intracellular delivery of zinc. So if the mechanism is through zinc transport, it certainly makes sense to provide the zinc. And that's where Dr. Zelenko comes in. It's very interesting. He has provided a regimen of the hydroxychloroquine and the azithromycin, also called Zithromax.
Give us that one more time. That there was a cutout there called.
So hydroxychloroquine and azithromycin is the combination in terms of medical antibiotics that has had the most physical data to support it. And he has been providing it along with zinc, so those three together. And I saw his report on the first 500 patients, and he's in a community of 20,000 Hasidic persons. And their data suggested that on the order of 2/3 of their group was infected. So a pretty significant number of people that he was looking after. And he reserved that combination for persons that were developing significant respiratory symptoms. And using that, not one person was hospitalized. And then there was a further update that added 200 more people. And at that point, there were only 4 hospitalizations, but none developed a severe respiratory syndrome or required ICU care or intubation. So out of 700 people with respiratory symptoms, not one progressed to a severe condition. And zinc was part of that protocol, and logically so. So of the programs that have been working, that is one of the best. In addition, in terms of what everybody can take as a preventative, there is a lot of evidence for the use of vitamin D. And one of the reasons people get colds and flus this time of the year is that people don't go outside as much, don't get as much high quality direct sunlight, and vitamin D levels tend to drop.
I am not getting enough vitamin D. There's no sunlight in this studio.
Right.
And I'm not allowed to go out. So I'm just here.
There you go.
I caught on the floor the whole thing. So, yes, vitamin D, it's great. How much?
We need to get you some bright lights.
Yeah.
Well, what's interesting is that the RDA for vitamin D has been 400 international units. And over the past probably 10 years, vitamin D has become one of the hot areas of discussion in medicine, especially anti-aging medicine, where it's believed that that recommendation is way too low, and probably most would say that the minimum should be about 1,000 IU. And under these circumstances, the recommendations are to take roughly 5 to 10,000 IU per day total. The best way to monitor vitamin D levels is actually doing blood levels. And the prior standard was to reach a level that was above 30, but the more current recommendations and those that suggest greater health benefits across a wide number of issues, including not just reduced risk of viral infections and for enhanced immunity, also anti-tumor protection. So the ideal level, if you're actually doing it the optimal way of checking blood levels, would be in the 60 to 90 range. And probably for most people, taking 5,000 IU per day will get them there. And at that level, it's not likely to get vitamin D toxicity. You can't take too much vitamin D. I wouldn't suggest taking over 5,000 units a day for a prolonged period of time unless you're monitoring blood levels. And that said, for this purpose, over the next 6 to 8 weeks, I believe that can be generally quite safely used.
Awesome. So the list goes on. This is what we're going to eventually review on the screen, perhaps, or give the link so people can go there.
Right. Just I'll put this all together in one place for everybody's use. And the other particularly important nutrient that Linus Pauling got lots of knickers in a twist about, the 2-time Nobel laureate who could easily have been the 3-time Nobel laureate because he was within hair's breadth of being the first to actually decode the structure of DNA, and would have if his son hadn't actually allied himself with Watson and Crick instead of with him. That's another part of the story. He's considered the father of orthomolecular medicine, and he is the first person to really champion the use of higher doses of vitamin C. And for most people, I would recommend taking probably at least 2,000 milligrams of vitamin C per day. Most people don't generally get enough, and that would be a reasonable protective dose for someone who's generally well and healthy.
I have to weigh in here because we go around the world and people talk to me all the time and they say, well, that's just nuts that there hasn't been any evidence on that. And you just say getting their knickers in a knot. And then others have come up and say, I live this way. And there's something that happens with the body when you take that much that's not really been talked about. You pee most of it away, they say, but something happens that is obviously working because those who've been on it and using this and giving these doses have said, my health has never been better. So I know that there's something there.
There are thousands of articles in the scientific literature that support the use of vitamin C at higher doses than the 60 milligram per day RDA. And actually, when we get into the discussion of the proven treatments, high dose vitamin C figures quite prominently.
Okay, moving on.
So those are very basic recommendations. There are a host of other botanicals antioxidants and immune modulators that may be beneficial. There are a number of medicinal mushrooms, for example, that have been shown to enhance immune function. There is a supplement called beta-2-glucan, which has been shown to be immune enhancing, especially for cellular immunity, wide range of herbs. So what's interesting, the one respiratory herb that has been a little controversial is elderberry. And someone sent me an article showing that elderberry may actually increase interleukin-6 levels, and higher IL-6 has been associated with the severe respiratory syndrome. So in general, the wide range of immune-boosting botanicals and mushrooms are probably good to take, but there is a question mark over elderberry, so I would put a caution there.
What's the future? Or are you ready for that?
Well, let me do a quick summary.
Oh, thank you.
Of the treatments, the things that have been shown to work.
Good, good.
Some of which have been talked about in the media, and some of which are just not as well known. And
okay.
people should know.
Like standing on one foot facing north and having a man.
Right.
No,
right.
I'm kidding.
So in the very earliest phases of the pandemic, from my colleagues, I received the information about the suggestion of the particular vitamin and mineral protocol that I discussed. So among anti-aging doctors and complementary doctors, there's a lot of alignment on everything that I just discussed. And what was also presented is that hydroxychloroquine was used in Korea. And some of the really good epidemiologic work, and epidemiology is the study of large populations to make conclusions or create an understanding of the dynamics of how a particular condition moves for population and what makes it worse, what makes it better, what are the relevant factors. And in the earliest stages with the outbreak in China, the mortality was coming up at about 3 to 4%. And more recent numbers are less, I think in significant part because there are a lot more asymptomatically infected people than have been tested. That said, with a comparative scenario, the mortality that was seen in South Korea was only about half of 1%. And they did a lot of very prompt, very aggressive actions. They did the lockdown quite promptly, more promptly than the US did, though I think the US was reasonably prompt on it. And they did other things like aggressive testing, tracing down contacts of people that were positive, making sure that people really were isolated if they were infected or exposed to someone that was infected. And they were also using hydroxychloroquine. So hydroxychloroquine had a particular regimen which was recommended at 400 milligrams twice a day the first day, then 200 milligrams twice a day for 4 more days, as a factor that was related to the mortality in South Korea being reduced by about 90%. So a 1/10 factor, or improving survival roughly tenfold. So that's where I first became aware of hydroxychloroquine as one of the links. And the next information that came up was combining hydroxychloroquine with the antibiotic known as azithromycin. The brand name is Zithromax, and it's often given in something called a Z-Pack, where you take 2 of them the first day and then 1 a day for the next 4 days. The hallmark of that particular compound is that it is selectively drawn into the white blood cells, and the white blood cells take it to where the infectious process is. So you take it for 5 days, but there's an effect in tissue that lasts for 10 days. And the combination was presented in a study from France that was really quite interesting. And what the study showed, and this will be one of the references that I'll give in the compilation that I do, the specific reference for the original data, was that they looked at the control group and the levels of virus in the blood using standard PCR or polymerase chain reaction testing, where they can amplify the viral RNA to see what the true level is. And the persons that were in the control group, the viral levels stayed roughly the same over 10 days. The persons that got hydroxychloroquine showed a reduced level. It was significant. As I recall, it was roughly, looked like roughly 2 log reduction, or roughly, ballpark 99% reduction, which is significant, enough to be considered an effective treatment by usual standards. What was most interesting was that the combination of the hydroxychloroquine plus the zithromycin showed that by day 5, the virus was completely gone from the blood. So of the data that we have thus far that have looked explicitly at what's happened to viral load, the best evidence is for that particular combination of the hydroxychloroquine plus the zithromax, and I'll provide the specific doses.
So everybody who's listening right now is going, wow, that is significant. Where do I get it?
Well, those are prescription medications. So those would only be given if someone had respiratory symptoms that were suggestive, ideally respiratory symptoms in a positive test.
That's what I thought.
Although the delay in getting the test is such that if someone had suggestive symptoms, it would simply make sense to go ahead and give that combination. I think that is the best proven combination thus far, especially with the data suggesting that the combination can reduce viral load to 0.
I hope that some physicians are listening that would not necessarily have had that research presented to them. Perhaps this is oversimplification, but you are a researcher. You are the one who is giving us this, and perhaps the frontline people don't all know that yet.
Yeah. So, and that is really the reason to put together the compilation, so that all the information can be in one place, that people can simply know what's already working. And, the studies are small. We wouldn't call it absolutely confirmative proof of a cure, as it were. But there's enough proof of the mechanism and certainly enough safety of the compounds relative to the danger of not doing the treatment, that I think the medical standard right now would be the combination of those two. And what's interesting is that the doctor in New York, who has used that combination at the first evidence of significant respiratory symptoms combined with the zinc, which is very logical if the hydroxychloroquine mechanism is improved zinc delivery into the cell, that in 700 cases that maybe of those 70 or 100 would have been hospitalized, and some of them wouldn't have survived. Instead, in 700 cases, 4 went to the hospital, but none got critical, none required ICU, none required intubation. So his statistics are much, much better than the national or international averages. So I think with the data we have in hand, that would be a gold standard, at least the best standard that we have until we have more information. There are many trials going on all around the world to look at other compounds that are promising. And that said, why not use it? I'll also say that when I learned about hydroxychloroquine, which was early, which was before the president made the announcement of the promise of the hydroxychloroquine Zithromax combination, I called my local pharmacist and I asked him to have some on hand in case I wanted to prescribe it for people that needed it. And he couldn't get a supply. So availability, I think, may be an issue. Even if it's prescribed, there can be a supply chain challenge.
I think that's going to, I know it's going to change in time, but that's going to be one of the things that we're going to be making some more of.
Right.
After all of it.
No, it's really interesting on the vitamin C score, particularly those people that are vitamin C naysayers. There is a study from, I believe it is one of the, I think it's Shanghai. It's Shanghai or Beijing. And it is from a doctor seeing critically ill patients. And when patients are going into the respiratory syndrome, that's when you get into the critical phase. And as someone who is a trained specialist in pulmonary and critical care medicine, I don't do that now, but it's my training background, that I have all too much experience in the situation where people get a so-called severe respiratory syndrome. We generally call it ARDS, or acute respiratory distress syndrome, which is also called pulmonary capillary leak syndrome. And the technical side of what happens is that the severe inflammatory process causes such inflammation in the capillaries of the lung that they just become very, very leaky. And the fluid just doesn't stay in the capillaries. It weeps out into the lungs, fills the alveoli with fluid, and becomes very hard to do air exchange. So it was very interesting. When it gets into the more severe state of the condition, where it's, the hydroxychloroquine Zithromax plus or minus zinc combination is particularly, if it's going to the early respiratory syndrome phase, because then there's the most capacity to pull people out of it before it becomes severe. Once it becomes more severe, it's a different story. And what's really interesting is that this doctor took patients that were moderately severe and gave them 10 grams of vitamin C IV per day. And if people were severe, he gave them 20 grams of vitamin C IV per day. And based upon the usual dynamics of persons with that severity, in all likelihood, a reasonable estimate of probable mortality would be in the range of 30 to 70%. And that's just my guess. He didn't define the characteristics more closely than that, but a very high risk group. And just that, and one of the patients that was quite severe, he gave 50,000 or milligrams or 50 grams IV to start. And with that regimen, 10 grams IV per day for 7 to 10 days for moderately severe, 20 grams per day IV for 7 to 10 days for severe, he had 100% success. There was zero mortality. Everybody made it through.
That's great. That's awesome to know. Are we at that place yet where we talk about the future?
Well, let's see. I do want to share one more intervention that's quite interesting because, as you know, I'm into the light therapy side of things. And the intervention that worked in vitro for the most recent and actually more aggressive disease called MERS, the Middle Eastern Respiratory Syndrome, a study was done that used two things, which is vitamin B2 or riboflavin and ultraviolet light. And that study did 3 samples of pooled plasma and 6 samples of individual plasma. And in 9 out of 9 cases, reduced the virus to below detectability. And what's interesting is that there is a modality that's practiced even in San Diego of giving riboflavin intravenously at a dose of 200 milligrams as a photoactivator, and it will actually attach itself to pathogens. And we know it works for MERS, so in all likelihood, it'll work for this current so-called SARS-CoV-2. And the methodology would be after or in conjunction with the riboflavin being infused intravenously, a fiber optic catheter is placed into a vein, and then 2 wavelengths of letter U's, ultraviolet at 375 nanometers for 30 minutes, and then blue light at 447 nanometers for 30 minutes. And that combination, based upon the MERS data, is very likely to greatly reduce, if not completely clear, the current corona from the blood. So that's yet another, it's not a proven cure, but it's a probable cure.
That's awesome. I haven't heard any of this from anywhere. I think you're very astute, leading edge on these things. And if just so for people to know, you don't have notes in front of you. You're not reading a screen. This is all coming from your mind, and that's one of the things that I love about you is that you've remembered absolutely everything, or almost everything. I'll tell you, when he starts screwing up his mouth and his face and trying to remember things, that's very helpful. That's some kind of a mechanism, I think, that it goes right to his brain and helps him remember things. And I've watched you do this for years, so just to let you know. Okay, tell us what you think about the future.
Well, the hope of this pandemic, to my mind, is that we've really seen a globally coherent world, unification of purpose to get through this thing together. We've seen the need to cooperate in new ways. And I believe it may allow new technologies to come into the picture as well. And I will, for interest, say that I have been in communication with the NIH. I've shared some of the data with HIV, which the methodology we use for inactivating HIV could potentially be used for corona as well, but we would need to get into a laboratory and have the means to adjust the sculpted magnetic fields that we create with our system. So in the future, in a sane world, if we get the resources that we may have the good fortune of receiving this year, then we really could be looking at a method whereby if there is a new outbreak of something, then if we use HIV as a model, the number of experiments it took to find something that worked, in all likelihood in 6 to 8 weeks, if we knew the viral genome and the so-called proteome, both the genetics as well as the protein structures that the virus had, we probably could define an electromagnetic solution, I'm guessing in 6 to 8 weeks, if there were enough resources put in that direction. And that's not a type of solution that has been used. And yet, if the challenge of having these pandemics come up more regularly, if, as Dr. Sinclair from Harvard says, that this may be something that we're going to be visiting every 5 to 10 years because corona is mutating relatively rapidly, then that may actually create enough of a need to look for new solutions. So for our original work, as you know, was looking for a solution for HIV, and we figured out how to do it in the test tube. And we got to some degree with doing it in populations in Africa and elsewhere. And the world just wasn't ready for a so-called electromagnetic frequency medicine solution for things. I think there may be more receptivity to that, especially, won't be for this epidemic, but potentially for future epidemics that will be in position to do that. And imagine if we had a solution within 6 weeks and we had enough technology that the at-risk parts of the population could be using it, that could, the investment could well be worth it when people actually tell you what the bill is going to be for this pandemic. From the even bigger picture of things, the original title, Enhanced Human Biology, you did a beautiful job of describing our laser technology being unique. It's really more than just lasers. It's really creating a type of waveform that creates a shift in certain space-time geometries and phenomena that allows us to deliver vibrational frequencies more effectively, particularly more deeply through the body. We've had the privilege, I think basically it's God's gift to us, that He's given us a type of cell called the V cell. And you've heard about this quite a bit as I've spoken around the world, but for those of you who haven't heard a word about it yet.
Tell us about the V cell. That's one of the most interesting things. Thank you for going there.
Sure. So a V cell is a shortened form of VSEL, and the long term is very small embryonic-like stem cell. And embryonic-like is important, which means that these are very early stage cells that are pluripotential and can become anything that we need in the body, whether it's a brain cell, a heart cell, a muscle cell, a cartilage cell, a kidney cell, a liver cell, or any other type of cell. But they're embryonic-like, they're just past embryonic stage, so they don't have the risk, and it's been shown that they don't form teratomas, which are benign tumors that the very early stage embryonic stem cells can induce. So these are the most powerful types of stem cells that we can possibly have in the body that are also safe to use. And what's amazing, like the astounding realization with the V cells is that at or around the time that we are born, the V cells go into hibernation. It's not known why, but they simply go to sleep. Occasionally they come out of hibernation if there's a major stress, like a heart attack or a stroke. And the people that have rapid repair of those problems are most likely those where the V cells really do awaken and become very active. Although once the crisis is over, they tend to go right back into hibernation. And over the past 6 years, we have developed the art of learning how to separate and activate the V cells just from blood. So there are various types of stem cell treatments, so-called autologous treatments, where stem cells from that person's own body are used. So, for example, stem cells are derived from someone's fat or from someone's bone marrow, or even from a tendon or dental pulp. And the reality is that all the other types of stem cells in the body undergo an aging process, such that the stem cells from a 70-year-old are not as active or effective as from a 20-year-old. The difference is the B cells, whether someone is 2 or 20 or 50 or 90 years old. Because they are hibernating, the cells aren't dividing. The telomeres, the DNA aging clock, they're not shortening, so the cells are not aging in the sense of the DNA aging clocks showing an aging process. And once they're awakened, it's literally like someone's newborn cells.
Now this is fairly new information, isn't it? Wasn't this a discovery in the last 5 years or so?
Yes. Well, the V cells have been known a little bit longer, but these characteristics, the enumeration of them, the methods of activating them, these are all very new in the past 5 years. So we have done the work, particularly in the past 3 years, of aligning with a Cambridge-trained PhD, trained with a Nobel laureate. Our colleague is a Dr. Peter Hollins, who's also Professor Peter Hollins, who trained with Professor Sir Robert Edwards, who won a Nobel Prize for the invention of in vitro fertilization. So with Dr. Hollins, we have done the work in the laboratory of confirming that our use of the specialized waveform of our technology not only awakens the V cells, it puts them in a condition where they can expand themselves. And we also are able then, once we give the cells back IV, to have these newborn caliber stem cells and to give them the homing signal. Literally, we create this song of the stem cells that wherever we direct that signal, that wave through tissue, the cells are attracted to go there, stay there, and repair there. And while we don't have the results yet of actually showing an increased percentage of cells going where we want them to go, we see clinical results that are multiples of what have been seen elsewhere using stem cells even directly to an organ. And
now, just so everyone knows and how this works, this is your work. This is your current exciting work.
Right.
This is what you're spending all your time on. And before the virus came, before any of these things now that we're talking about, this is where you were centered. And this is probably one of the most exciting, I would say, things that's coming along. I've always felt that somewhere along the line it's Nobel work, and then the discovery of getting a stem cell to activate and go where you want it to go and stay there is probably one of the biggest issues of stem cell technology. And you are working on that, and as you say, it's a very early stage, but I know that clinically you've seen a lot of results. Personally, I have been with you when you've seen that results. There's been some startling things happen that I won't talk about now, but that I know that you're on the right track, my friend. And so I love this. This is a good future to talk about.
Well, I'll put it in perspective. The core issues in stem cell therapy, one, are the source of the cells. And it's hard to do better than having the person be their own source of cells if the cells are robust, if the cells can get there, and if the cells will actually be able to integrate and create the repair. And we really could, and perhaps we will at some point, do an entire program just on the stem cell side of it. And there are many different types of cells, and what's extraordinary is that we really could not ask for a more perfect source of a cell. The V cells, it's basically as though you had saved your own umbilical cord blood when you were born to be able to use it again for yourself at a future time that you need it. And we're just at the beginning of this, the potential of this. What it means is that at any age, we can simply draw someone's blood, and we have a validated method of separating, concentrating, and activating those cells. And because they're very small, they're capable of going anywhere through the body. Other types of stem cells, if we give them IV, they're so big they get trapped and filtered out in the lung, whereas these cells are small enough to get through there and go everywhere, including the brain and spinal cord and heart and elsewhere. And once they go there, you really can't do much better than having a cell with newborn caliber telomeres, basically like resetting the aging clock back to newborn level, as a way to regenerate a tissue. So the capacity for us to take any quote unquote degenerative condition of any system of the body and to regenerate to a high level of function it's great. We're already seeing profound results, and this is the early stages. So what will become possible? The enhanced biology is, I believe we can take someone at almost any age and provide them the opportunity to turn back the aging clock 10, 20, 30 years, possibly even more. And potentially we can even enhance that person's biology to be even better than they could have been at that younger age. And I believe we also have the first vision, the first insight into the potential to rescript the human aging process itself and our potential for longevity. I think we're really, even now, we're at a point that the potential to significantly alter lifespan, and not just living longer, but living longer in a very healthy, enhanced way, I think it's already in our hands right now.
Using our own cells.
Yeah.
I have an esoteric question. We're going to wrap this up here in just a moment. Here is an esoteric question. With the discovery of these cells, knowing what they are, and having these very, very youthful cells in our bodies now, what is the process? What do you think? Do you think that the body is using them, or may use them in the future, or we're not there yet, or we're, why isn't this being used by the body in a way to keep us alive for 100 years or more?
That is a profound question. Of course, you and I have esoteric interests and a view of consciousness and where it fits into the picture. I've thought about, for example, the biblical figures. And I imagine you did as well when you read that, say, Methuselah lived to be 969 years in Genesis 5:27. And other biblical figures lived many hundreds of years. Part of me thought, well, maybe they were counting months as years or something like that. It was metaphoric, but not actual. And then when I learned about V cells, it occurred to me that if there were some process or state of consciousness that allowed the V cells to be active, that alone could be a mechanism that could allow much greater longevity. So it is in part a technical issue of biochemistry and information signals and rescripting the cells to perform in ways that we're looking for. And it could well be a consciousness issue that part of awakening the cells, or they're being activated in a way that it literally turns back the physical aging clock and turns back the DNA aging clocks, that it may well be the combination of consciousness and consciousness practices combined with lifestyle practices, combined with the information systems of separating and activating and directing the cells, that all those factors may work together to be the complete package of restoring or creating the potential for quote-unquote biblical longevity.
I agree with you fully, and especially the science has been done in the last 10 years or so with the Global Consciousness Project and the things that made the discoveries that consciousness is actually a form of energy.
Right.
And that it can even affect the magnetic field of the planet and all. Once we know consciousness is energy, the next step is how do we apply that energy inside our bodies to trigger these things? That is the future. I think that's an evolved future for humanity, and the ability to live a long time also carries with it, and I could say this, the wisdom not to overpopulate. Just because there's all the naysayers that say, well, we don't want that because then we'll look at the exponential growth. No, it comes with wisdom, and there's so much to say about that with the ancients who never overpopulated and been here thousands and thousands of years on continents. And so there's ways of this. Todd, I'm going to give you the last word before we say goodbye.
All right. Well, it's been a pleasure, as always, being with you. And I appreciate an opportunity to share key parts of the summary that I'll be providing that will just be for everyone to have the knowledge to go through this experience with Corona as elegantly as possible And my objective will be for it to wind up, once we get through the cost of it and the human challenges with it, that in the end there will be many constructive things that come forth from it, individually and collectively, and that it's the start of a global cooperation that's going to be extraordinary.
Thank you, Dr. Todd Ovakaitis. What we have here is a video that I know is going to be seen by many, many thousands. So based upon the last video that we did just a few days ago, I know this is going to be seen. This is a completely free video for anybody who wants to see it. And you might have noticed that on the screen I've been showing you a shortcut URL, a place where you can go and you can see the list and the chemistry and all the things that Dr. Ovakaitis has talked about in this brief time we've had together. Thank you, sir. Thank you, all my viewers. This has been Streaming with Lee. I know that we're going to talk to you, Dr. Todd, yet again someday. Thank you. We'll be back.